In 1936, 3 years after Hitler came to power, the Olympic Games were held in the German capital of Berlin. Hitler's Nazi ideology held that white Germans were a master race, naturally superior to all others. So you can imagine his frustration when his white German athletes were soundly beaten by a black American. Jesse Owens dominated the Games that year, winning 4 gold medals and exposing the Nazi ideology of white superiority as fraud. 2 years later, another athletic contest pitted a black American against a white German. This time it was a boxing match in which Joe Louis, aka the Brown Bomber, faced German heavyweight Max Schmeling. Again, Americans saw the bout as a metaphor for the struggle between the United States and Germany, which would soon become war. And again, the black athlete won, shattering the myth of white superiority by knocking out Schmeling in just over 2 minutes. These victories against white supremacism were merely symbolic, but in the 1940s, black Americans in every branch of the armed forces contributed to a real victory over Hitler's hateful regime in World War II. The defeat of the Nazis was in many ways a victory against white supremacism in Europe, but this triumph held little meaning for black Americans oppressed by white supremacism in the US. Many black soldiers hoped that they would return to a country that was ready to respect them and treat them as equals. But as black veterans returned to the US, they found that they still faced discrimination at every turn. It was still difficult for them to get jobs or business loans when many companies and banks preferred to do business with whites. Racial violence continued, erupting in a 1943 riot that rocked the city of Detroit, in which white mobs killed at least 25 black people. Worst of all, African Americans in many states still faced the systemic discrimination of Jim Crow laws, which segregated public spaces, provided them with poor quality services, and limited voting rights. Even the military had remained segregated through the end of World War II, in spite of the heroic actions of so many black service members. But in the late 1940s, cracks began to appear in the systems of segregation that had oppressed black people for 50 years. The first occurred in Major League Baseball, which at the time was without question the nation's most popular sport. The color barrier in baseball was broken in 1947 when Jackie Robinson was selected to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. In his first year, Robinson won the Rookie of the Year award and went on to win an MVP award in 1949. A small step forward, Robinson's baseball career suggested that integration was starting to be accepted in mainstream American society. In 1948, President Harry Truman finally addressed segregation in the armed forces. As commander-in-chief, Truman was able to integrate the military by executive order, without approval from Congress. From that point on, black soldiers would serve side by side with whites. Truman's executive action was another small step toward an integrated society. But most aspects of American life remained segregated, and one in particular was seen as especially damaging to black people: segregated schools. Black students received poor quality education, which limited their options for success later in life. Accordingly, the NAACP prioritized school desegregation in the years following World War II, using a strategy of legal challenges to chip away at school segregation laws in court. A brilliant lawyer named Thurgood Marshall worked with the NAACP to argue and win cases against schools which provided inferior services to black students.